Welcome to the Tuning In podcast, where we talk alignment, intuition, and our internal guidance system. We cover woo-woo topics in an approachable and practical way. I'm your host, Dana Evans of Alignful.com. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Tuning In podcast. This is episode 116. Today, I wanted to talk briefly about processing emotions on the fly and why it's important to tune in daily during challenging times. Now, I actually have a bigger episode that I want to share with you about a real life ninja level emotional processing experience that I took myself through the other day. But in order to be able to have that, I think it was really important for me to have the ongoing emotional daily clear out to support me. So we've had a challenging 2 weeks. I'll just say that without getting into any of the details. But it's been kind of intense over here. And so one thing that became clear was something intense happened, and then I kind of pulled away from my practices. And imagine how many times you've done that, right? It can be pretty common where even if life starts to get really busy, our default is to, or at least my default, is to forego my practices, like not moving as much, not doing my journaling, my meditation, my tapping, any and all of that. Breathing exercises, like those things go by the wayside. And it's this backwards way of the mind thinking, well, I don't have enough time, or I'm too stressed, or I'm too worried, so I can't do these things. And time again, I always come back to the clarity and the truth that is my practices need to be my top priority. Because when I'm doing my practices, when I'm supporting myself emotionally, physically, energetically, everything else becomes easier to handle. And so it was about 4 days or so, or 5 maybe even, where I just felt like I was in this state of duress. I didn't really have much of an appetite. I was tired. I didn't want to do anything. Like I felt like I couldn't cook. I couldn't make the bed. I was just in worry is where my mind was. So my mind was obsessed with the external, and it was very stressed and worried. Well, then that kind of clicked, and it made me realize, oh man, I have completely lost myself in the external. I was feeling like this hopelessness even about the state of the world. Like it was, I was like having this total emotional breakdown, like, oh, what is the point of anything? Like it was really heavy for me. And so once I kind of realized that I'd gotten so sucked into the external, I did a little evaluation of myself, and I thought, okay, this isn't working. I can't do anything. I'm feeling exhausted. I'm feeling hopeless. I have no energy. Clearly, this isn't working. I'm stuck in worry. I'm obsessed about the external. I'm stuck in thinking about the state of the world and not being able to be present to the state of my life. And something needs to shift. And when I looked back, I realized, oh, I disconnected from my practices. It was not a conscious choice. It just like happened. So one day I woke up after realizing that, and I'm like, okay, time to bring my energy back. Like this is the thing. When we're giving our energy away to anything that comes our way, like anything in the external, we start to lose our power because we can't control the external. Like I can't personally control the state of the world. I can control how I support my part in the world, but I cannot control the news. I cannot control any of that. And that's a really hopeless place to be in, because if you can't control all these things that are happening externally, and you give your energy and power to that, you can imagine you become like a tumbleweed, where it's like if things are good, you feel good. If things are bad out externally, you feel bad. And this can be the state of the world. This can be if you relate your emotional stability to someone directly in your life. Like, it's hard to let something that is not in your control dictate what is going on in your body. And also, once you get sucked into that, it's also can be hard to get out of it, as I've experienced. So I woke up and I realized, okay, time to come back, time to bring my energy back, time to call my power back, time to be able to control what is mine. I can't control much, but there are some things I can control. So that morning, first thing was, okay, what do I have control over? And my answers were my home, my health, my practices, my body, and to some extent, like my business, right? So what am I putting my energy into? And that became my baseline for where I'm going from here. So the first step for me always is the home. The home is a great representation of my mental state. So I cleaned out the fridge, organized the fridge, I made the bed, I picked everything up, I ran the vacuum, like I did everything, cleaned up the kitchen, like everything I could, did laundry to reclaim my home. And that's always a good first step for me. For you, it might be, going on a run or doing a meditation. But my first step is always home because my physical space makes a big difference for me. And if it is in disarray, it's hard for me to focus on doing anything else. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to sage my home. I'm going to use Palo Santo and just like clear the energy of my home. And that is a practice I like to do. We'd had visitors in our house. Like we'd had a lot of stressful times. I'd been doing client sessions. So I was like, okay, time to like clean out the energy of the home. And then from there, I booked a couple one-to-one movement sessions because I wasn't doing any of my yoga. And sometimes you just got to pony up and do something that's going to force you to do it. And I did not want to show up to that class, but I knew it was in alignment for me to book it. So I had a one-to-one session, a couple of them. I actually have another one this week to really help me get back into my body and support my body and also moving and processing energy. Then I came back to my practices. And interestingly, my mom had just told me about a 7-day tapping challenge that she joined. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have all this access to tapping. I'm in Gala Darlings membership. There's tapping videos online. I know how to do it on my own. And yet I'm not doing it. So let's create some structure to support it, right? That's what the one-to-one yoga was doing, is creating structure for me. And then I joined this tapping challenge. And the tapping challenge is an 8-day challenge. And you literally tap on the same thing every day. And it's, I am enough. And oh my Lord, I cannot tell you how intense this has been for me. I'll get into it a little bit more later. But first and foremost, the point was, and the point is that tapping in itself, or emotional freedom technique, EFT, you tap on specific points. It's the crown of the head, the inner eyebrows, the temples, underneath your eye on that bone, underneath your nose, underneath your lip on your chin, collarbone, and then underneath your underarm. Like I do it underneath my right underarm. And you cycle through that. Even if you say nothing, this in itself is a really powerful technique to help clear stuck energy in the body and move energy. But if you pair it with an intention, for this example, I am enough, and you explore that way, it's even more impactful and potent because it helps you clear old memories from these situations where you felt like you weren't enough, for example. And what I realized as I started the challenge is, one, how much of my not enough story is still present. I mean, that's a big story. And also, if you're an open sacral, an undefined sacral, which means if you're a reflector, a manifester, or a projector, the undefined sacral, one of the shadows literally is not knowing when enough is enough. So while everyone can struggle with this idea of like not feeling good enough, not feeling like you're doing enough, not feeling like you're making enough money, making enough impact, not feeling that you have enough time, that you're good enough, any of these. While that, of course, can affect everyone, notice in human design, if you have an undefined sacral center, this could be even more amplified. So just doing that in its own was enlightening for me to focus on this enoughness, which I didn't even realize was inside of me so intensely. What I also know, committing to tapping every night, not only is it helping me clear this story of not being enough, but it's also helping me clear out my emotions every single day. Because like I said, whether you attach a story to it or not, tapping is like, it's a stress release. It's a daily way to process and move emotions. It's like sweating every day. So if you can get a little bit of sweat every day, it's going to help move stuff out more regularly. And that's what tapping does. And the other practices that I'm going to talk about. So doing the tapping, and then after the tapping, I was called to do some breath work, which I talked about on last week's podcast or 2 weeks ago. Frankly, these episodes, I guess, are similar. This shit works is the message behind all of this of if you're willing to do your own practices, you're going to help yourself a lot. You'll minimize like a giant breakdown. It's like, I take athletic greens every day. I drink athletic greens. Those are like my vitamins. And your tapping and your breath work are like your emotional vitamins every day. So you don't become deficient, or in this case, clogged up with emotions. So after the tapping, I decided to do the conscious connected breath work. And I only did about 5 minutes and I just breathed. And that is so freaking hard, guys. I cannot tell you. Breath work is like, that's a big one that I'm really getting into, but it's a beautiful way to move energy. And then after that, I slow down and just listen if there's any messages coming through from my inner voice. So those are my keys. I had given up on my athletic greens for a few days. Isn't it crazy? Like how quickly we can just drop everything. It's like you're going along, hit a bump, boom. It's like everything spilled out of my bag and I forgot to put it back in my bag. So that was the start of it. So that day I decided I'm going to maintain my home again. I'm going to start taking my athletic greens every morning and my lemon water. I'm going to do my tapping, breath work, and inner voice in the evenings, and I'm choosing to move my body. And that's honestly all it took. And that started to call me back to myself. And that's what this really is about, is the reason it's so important to do regular emotional support and like regular practices that are supporting you is because it brings you back to yourself. It tunes you back into your body. It helps you see, what emotions are present, what's getting stuck during the day, what needs to move out. And it helps you call back and reclaim your own energy. Because the truth is, or at least the truth that I believe, is if we are so sucked in and involved in the external that we lose ourselves, we're not actually doing any good. And it's alluring. You know what? I got really sucked in. I was reading the news. Oh my God. I was like, how does anyone survive reading the news every day? I felt literally my body position change. Like I was losing connection to my back heart, which is like your connection to the divine, that fullness in your back and your posture. I was outraged, right? My ego was like mad and defensive. And all of my energy, I was obsessed and continually talking about this stuff. All of my energy was focused externally. And that meant that I was giving all of my energy and power to that. And so by coming back to my practices, by returning to my body, my breath, by checking in with myself, I was able to call back my energy and power. Because what good am I if I'm in this state of worry and stress and I'm a tumbleweed to whatever's happening on the outside? Not very freaking good. Like, I couldn't do anything. Certainly nothing productive or supportive for myself or the world. So by coming back to myself, I got to recalibrate. Right? It's like, oh, exhale. What does my body need right now? What is present in my body? What messages do I need to hear? How can I settle back into my own truth so that I am then putting out compassionate, kind, loving energy and actions into the world? I didn't do a podcast last week because I'm like, ugh. Like, I need to deal with myself before I get on here and share with others, right? Because we're all conduits of energy. I even have in human design the something 44 channel, which is like you're a transmitter. So we're all transmitters, but my human design amplifies that. So regardless of what my words say, it's the energy behind them that is actually what lands with people. And while I do believe that's true in general, I'm extra conscious of that because I don't want to be transmitting funky energy if I don't have clarity and a lesson behind it. Right? Like, I do process on this podcast, but I don't do my emotional processing on this podcast. I come to you guys when I'm on the other side of things, right? At least when I'm more in the light. Even if I'm still in an experience, I can be on the light side of it so that I can share and reflect. Because I hope that is where the value lies in this podcast, is like me being like, here's the shit that's happening, and then here's what I'm doing with it, right? It's like a living experiment. So all of that is to say, I feel so much lighter, and I really feel like I went through a bit of a metamorphosis the last couple of weeks, and it was hard, but oddly or not, I feel closer and more connected to John. I now feel closer and more connected to myself. I shared really vulnerably with those who are close to me. I feel more connected to the bigger picture. I shared a funny reel on Instagram like a week ago, and it said, we always talk about the bigger picture, but do you ever sit there and think, how is this the bigger picture? Or like, what is the point? What is the point? It's like everything happens for a reason. What is the reason for this happening? And it's funny, right? But it's true. I was having a lot of big conversations with people close to me of like, remind me what the bigger picture is. What are we doing in this world? I don't just want to be knocked around by the news. Like, what is the bigger picture? And that brings me to another point, which is nature. John and I went on a hike, and it was like the second we got on that trail, I just felt my body soften into like, oh, this is the bigger picture. Connection to self, connection to source, connection to nature, connection to others. Bada bing, bada boom, right? That's the bigger picture. And so when we get lost in either the details, I feel emotion coming up around that. Right? Like when we get lost in the details, or we get lost in what the other, and I mean like the other, not like your friend or family member, but the news media, right? Television, ads, pharmaceutical ads. Those are always so depressing to me. Social media, when we get so lost in that, and notice this for yourself, because I see it in myself, like when you're really hyper connected to that external, what happens to your other connections? So what happens to your anchor points of self, source, nature, relationship? And that might be a fun experiment of just watch, like when I'm super connected to nature, am I as focused on social media? When I'm super connected to myself, am I as obsessed with what the other is doing? When I have super deep present relationships, am I as worried about the state of the world and the news? And playing with those questions, just seeing what your body does. And then the question from there becomes, what feels better? Which state do I have more power to have a positive impact? For me, it was not the state of duress, of hopelessness, of disconnection. That just created more of the same. But when I got back to nature, when I got back to myself through my practices, those brought me back to source. And from that place, I was able to have more deeper connections in my relationships. And from that place, I feel like I have so much more to offer and share in my business, in my life, and in my relationships, and with myself, and to source, and with nature, right? It's like everything has a ripple effect. And so the question is, which ripple are we creating? And all that is not to say you don't go through it, because you do. We have to. I had to get to that point of hopelessness to be like, oh my gosh, I've just given up on all of my practices. That's okay. It's part of the process. The point of all of this isn't like, never stop your practices, right? Never dip, never let anything go wrong. No. Don't misinterpret that. The point of this is when we're going through it, I feel like the light is what we want to hold on to, even in the darkness. Even when you go dark, if you can find one sliver of light, and it might come through standing outside with your feet in the grass, or hearing the birds chirp, or your animal like being silly and giving you a laugh, or a beautiful question from a friend or family member, or a moment of surrender where you break down in tears and say, what do you want from me? So even in the heaviness, even in the sadness, right? The world is challenging right now. Like, that is real. I can see that and have compassion for that and do what I can to have a positive ripple effect. And I don't need to be completely sucked in and lost in the hopelessness of the world, because then I just add to hopelessness. So we can have both. You can have the pain, the heaviness, the darkness. You can process those emotions, and you can oscillate, right? And come back to yourself. And coming back to yourself involves seeing the heaviness and darkness that you may be carrying, so that it doesn't sneak in and take you over without your consent, but you're bringing the light to it so that it can be seen and released. And I think there's a lot of power in that. And that's really, ultimately, we want to be able to call our own power back. Because when we as individuals are in our connected power, and I mean like not that external power force, I mean that inner knowing of your own truth. Like, I'm stable and anchored in my truth. That's powerful. Just standing and holding that creates a ripple effect, right? I don't have to go yelling it to the world, but you'll know what that feels like in your own body. And I'll give you some examples. So like, you can do this test of, am I in my power? Have I lost all my energy? Am I in my power? What's happening? And this is just like a little practice. This is a tuning in practice, right? That will help you navigate this. And so the questions are like, when I tune in to my body, so stop, take a breath, inhale, release. Okay, pause. Just tuning into your body, where do you feel the energy concentrated? It's very likely that it's going to be concentrated around your head. I even feel that right now. And if that's the case, that means you're likely disconnected from the majority of your body. So a simple practice to settle this. Notice the energy circulating around your head. And then as you exhale, picture the energy moving down. And you can do this like 4 times. So first exhale, energy moves to the throat. Next exhale, energy moves to the heart. Next exhale, energy moves to the solar plexus, sternum, diaphragm. Next exhale, energy moves to the belly. Inhale. Next exhale, energy moves to the pelvic floor. Final exhale, energy moves to your feet on the floor. And then pause and feel that. And just notice, can you feel the energy a little bit more dispersed around your body? Yeah. And then the next step from there is to notice, where am I holding? Is there any tightness or gripping or an area in my body that would like more presence from me? Like, I can feel it actually as I'm talking to you. There's like a little tension in my left lower rib, so probably spleen area. And so what you would do from there, first finding that is hugely valuable because that shows you're really present with your body. And then go to that spot. You can place your hand there. You can gently tap there and just say, hello. I see you. I hear you. I am open and ready to receive from you. And then breathe. And then you can take a few rounds of breath where you're sending your breath specifically to that one part of your body. Just breathing there. We're not here to judge, to analyze, to criticize, to figure out. Notice those are all mind things. We're here to feel, to sense, to allow, to breathe, and to move that space. Focus on the exhales. Couple more. Yeah. And notice if just from that, if you feel a little more settled. I sure do. A little more anchored, a little more contented, a little taste of peace. That feeling of being in your body, being embodied, calling your energy, attention, and power back to you. And then from that place, from that stillness, you can ask, is there anything I need to know right now? Are there any messages I need to hear or remember? I'm hearing this is allowed. You are here. We are here. We are all here. And when we come back to the here and now, that is when we can truly hear. Can't you hear it? Can't you feel it? Can't you sense all that is within? All that is within, all that is within. It is not necessary to focus on what is without, what you are without, what is outside of you. For coming back and filling yourself from within, filling every crevice, every void, every space with love and expansion and truth and knowing and light. And trusting that coming from that space from within is ultimately what will shift the without. So make this practice yours. taste it, feel it, inhale it, breathe it in, and let it wash over your body. For every time you come back to here, to now, to us, to body, to breath, you are whole again. Thank you, inner voice. That was my message. I'm curious to hear what message came through to you. And I will share that after sharing that, I feel even more anchored, more grounded, more settled. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. If you're curious about getting deep into your body, processing emotions with my support, you can book a single emotional clearing session. And if you're really wanting to start to establish a baseline of peace in your life and true embodiment, and to shed all of the old baggage and trapped emotions that are creating your life now. And if you want to be in the seat of power where you're creating your life from a place of peace and truth and knowing, then I invite you to join me as a one-to-one client in the Insight Experience coaching program. So I'll put the application to that below. Even if you're not totally sure if this is a match, I encourage you to fill out the application because there's some great questions for you in that. And then we can get on a call and just explore if this is something that you need right now, if this is aligned. So let me know. I would love to work with you. And I'm really excited as I get deeper and deeper and deeper into this work for myself. I need to bring this to others. I have this deep desire to have others experience this level of connection and peace and stillness, and actually use that as the baseline to operate from. And I would be honored to support you on this journey. So, as always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tuning In podcast. As always, if this would resonate with anyone you know, please share the episode. You can follow along with my journey on Instagram at Dana_Evans, or find me on my website at alignful.com.